Uh, so what, the dairy was 30 some years.
Yeah.
How did you get into the sign painting part of it?
Well, that was always my hobby, and I would moonlight. I would bet people when I leave Kansas City. We were down in the Fairfax district, Kansas City, and that's where the dairy was during World War II. That we would process all the surplus milk, all the way from Fort Scott to clear up in Iowa, and all the milk would come in. Which at that time was grade C milk, which you'd make into cheese, and so I would do all the processing, and I would during World War II, I would relieve 4 people every weekend, 2 people on Saturday, 2 people on Sunday, and that was the only way they could get a day off, and they just wanted to have a day off, and you can't imagine people saying, well, I just want a day off, I don't care if I get paid or not. That's what the way they were. So I would relieve them. I would do their job in half the time, and some of them didn't like that, but I learned how to do that. That's how I learned how to run all the equipment. And so anyway, the manager wanted to build this new plant in Lawrence, and at the time it didn't seem like it seemed like a silly thing to do. When we were already in Kansas City, why would we want to build a plant in Lawrence and then ship all the milk back to Kansas City? But I mean, he knew what he was doing. So anyway, he's a fascinating guy.
Still alive.
Made it all. Oh yeah, still made it all work. And he would start all these other divisions. It was All Star, and I would because I'd learned how to do all this silkscreen, and I'd make all the decals. So the kids had helped me when I'd make these all the way from 10-inch decals to 30-inch decals. And he started a transportation division, and he hauled beef from the state of Kansas to New York. Then he started when we were still in Kansas City, he started a water division. And he came to me, and I was doing the processing, and he says, I'm going to start bottling water. And I said, well, okay, you tell me what you want done, and I'll get it done. So we picked up water from Basswood Springs over in Missouri, and we had the stainless steel tanker trucks, and I'd run it through the same process as the milk, and we started bottling it. And he landed a contract with one of the railroads, and after that he had several railroads, so we supplied all the half-pint water to all the work crews of all the railroads. And everybody says, well, who in the world would buy water? And this was before any bottled water or anything. And so it's still operating today. And he owned the building, and they run out of room where that building. They built another processing plant over in Missouri, over by off of whatever that would be over there, not the little town over there. Anyway, these plastic bottles come out at 900 a minute out of that new plant. And it's still operating. So he was so far ahead of his time, and so we'd chit chat about everything together. But when I went down to visit him, it was a 2.5-hour nonstop conversation of stuff he's still involved in.
What was the label of the water? I mean, it wasn't.
It was almost all the labels was All Star.
Okay.
And we had Kansan was the label of the powdered milk during World War II, and but that was quite a process to do all that. So I did all the condensing and run the powder machine and all that. When a lot of older men were afraid of running the condensers and big vacuum pans, they called them, to condense the milk, and so it's amazing.
But you weren't afraid.
No.
Just like Michael wasn't afraid.
Oh no, yeah. Yeah.
Well, how do you explain all your energy?
My grandmother Young told my mother that she'd never raised me. That my health was so bad when all the way through grade school, and I had 3 and 4 abscesses before I went to grade school. and they would, and she'd take me to Dr. Wilson in Leavenworth, and I wouldn't let him get in my mouth, but I was in constant pain. He says, I remember this, he says, I don't have to put up with this. And they took me down to Risden Sterrett Clinic, and 4 people, one on each arm and one on each leg, and they strapped me down, and I remember him coming with that gas mask, and they gassed me to knock me out, and he pulled these teeth out. And I went through that all through grade school, high school. I had every tooth in my head was full of mercury fillings, and I was skin and bones, and so I've had a health problem, my whole lifetime. So in order to overcome that, then I was either and I had low blood sugar. For Ada would fix before I'd pass. When I was 10 years old, I'd pass out. I passed out enough to write a book on it. That when you pass out and you can no longer hear anything and you can't see anything, your mind's still operating. And so it's a miracle. I don't know, everything that I've read since then, it's a miracle that I didn't die all those times, because when you'd pass out, every pore on every joint would perspire, that you're so close to death. And and they'd take me, well, something wrong with his heart. And finally, when I was 21, Dr. Moore, who'd been examining me since I was 10, says, I think I know what's wrong with you. I think you have low blood sugar. So he sent me to Cushing Hospital, and they give me this real syrupy, just loaded with sugar. And I would drink it, and then they'd check my blood and my urine for 2 hours, and I burned every bit of it up. And they couldn't figure it, And so he was far ahead of his time, because most people thought there was something mentally wrong with people that, when they had low blood sugar. Yeah. And so I've been to people that have, problem with their blood sugar meetings, and I asked them, what's worse, to have low blood sugar or high blood sugar? And they said, high blood sugar. And I said, I beg to differ with you, that I've had to put up with it my whole life. So I think that probably had a lot to do that. When I felt good, I felt real good, and when I felt bad, I felt real bad. So I think that's where a lot of that comes, because I've had so many things I had to overcome. Because my grandma didn't think they'd ever raise me. My mom must have been short of calcium, I'm sure. So
yeah. There's an interesting book by a guy named Charles Leroy Edson, and it's called, I forget the title now, but he grew up in Nebraska, Wilbur, Nebraska, and his family was English, but they would get sick all winter, particularly in late winter. The whole family would be sick, but there were lots of Bohemians, Czechs around, what we call Czech now. And they were just walking around. They were all terrific and just no problems. And the English were like this, and it was scurvy. And these Czechs would eat this sauerkraut, and they would get their vitamin C, but the English were too proud to eat sauerkraut. So that the English types were all just in terrible condition until they could get some onions or an orange or something in the springtime.
See, this is the problem with the Ebola.
Yeah.
The body loses all its vitamin C.
Yeah.
And
it's well, again, you're a survivor.
Yeah. I was either, when I played softball, I still love to hit the softball. The heart of that, when that ball comes, that's the enemy in the ball, and I'd love it when I knock the ball over the fence. But I think the other thing is, when you have come close to dying many times, when you're okay, you have a far greater appreciation of life than people that have never come that close.
I understand.
So
I understand. Well, do you paint downstairs? Is
Yeah,
that where you work?
my
Well, maybe we should go down there.
Well, I don't know if we can get in there or not, but you'll have to put up with it.
Oh, that's all right. That'd be fine.